as John said, I've been in the playground industry for 30 years. So I'd like to know, I think I know a little bit of what's going on. I think the only thing I'll say is I'm not surprised by what's going on. So you'd be very, very hard pressed to surprise me and tell me something that's gone on your playground that will make me shocked, because I do know lots of things that go on. But what we've got to try and do today is, and what I'm going to try and advise you on today, because it is advice, I'm not trying to scare you away from playgrounds. That's certainly not the idea. I'd like you all to have as much equipment as possible, but it's actually how to manage that equipment and maintain it as you go forward. Everything I'm going to talk to you about today, if you look at the bottom of the screen there, comes from the RPII. So that's the Register of Playground Inspectors International. And a lot of the stuff and the slides that I've taken with kind permission from them. So when people talk about, and John slipped into it at the start, talking about, are you ROSPA trained? ROSPA is an independent body that are aligned with the RPII. So the ROSPA are a private company when it comes to inspections, just like the play inspection company that some of you may use, some of the Seagrave inspection services, and a lot of those companies will do individual training. So it's all what I'm looking at is the guidelines that are set out by the RPII today. The other body at the bottom there, which is worth looking at, is the API, which is the Association of Playground Industries. And that's basically a trade body, but actually any of the companies you're using should be a member of the API, because that'll give you a little bit of confidence that the equipment that you're purchasing is up to standard, that the company is actually suitable and buoyant, because they do check out the financials of the companies as well. And those websites are very important ones for you to go to, and I will refer to them as we go through. Everything I talk about today, when we talk about standards, will be in relation to the playground standards, and I'll often refer to EN 1176, EN 1177, which is the European standards. Yes, we're not in Europe anymore. That's another debate, and whether we will, but we'll stick with them at the minute. But when I talk about playground standards, I'm also referring to muggers, multi-use games areas, skate parks, fitness equipment, pump tracks, all the rest of it. But rather than having to have a little bit of referring to all the standards, I'll just talk about playground standards, and it encompasses them all within that. So that's a bit of a brief overview, and we'll progress now and go through the process that you should be adopting. And as I say, I'm not here to scare you, but I'm just lying it up for you to say what you should be doing within the process. So when you first off, why should you inspect and maintain? And it's like anything. If you buy any product, whether that be a dishwasher, whether it be a car, whatever, the more you look after it, the longer it'll last. It's a major purchase, and for a lot of town councils, parish councils, parish meetings, playgrounds will sometimes be the highest purchase that you will carry out in a year or in a lifetime of that parish council. Maybe not if you're at Castle Donington and you look at buildings and all the rest of it, but the playground, you will invest a lot of time, effort and money in to selecting and putting the playground in place. And you're looking at then the playground to last you for a good length of time. And it's like anything. If you look after it, it will last a long time. And I'm sure lots of you have got swings, for example, seesaws and roundabouts that have been there 20 to 50 to 60 years. And in some areas, I know it gets very personal, and people say, "Oh, you're not removing that because my children and my grandchildren have played on it." So it is a case. The more you look after it, the longer it'll last, and you will get a good amount of use out of the equipment. But you've got to put that time and effort in. And I always refer to it like a car, because if you buy a car and you don't check the oil, you don't check the tires, you don't put water, all those little bits and bobs that you should do constantly on a car, it'll start and malfunction. It'll not run as true as it should do with you. And then you'll get it to the point where the car's not lasted as long as it would have done if you'd had the service, if you'd had the MOT, and if you'd put a bit of TLC into it. So the playgrounds are very similar in that respect. So what should you do? Well, in the inspection and maintenance, it is your responsibility as the provider to inspect and maintain the playground equipment. I can scare you and say that if you don't do it, there's a thing called corporate manslaughter. So if you do end up at that position and something fails and a child gets hurt, then you will be liable for that. If you're responsible for the inspection and maintenance regime, all you can do is carry out the inspection and maintenance regime, put it to the parish, town council, or whoever, and say, these are the items that need replaced, repaired, whatever, and which is basically what you're doing on the annual inspection. And then it's up to the parish and town council to sit and vote and say, well, we can't afford it, or we need to do it because of health and safety, or we've got to basically make that piece of equipment segregated from the rest of the area and not use it because you can't afford to repair it at that point in time. But you've got to be seen to be acting on it. So the inspection and maintenance regime is there to make sure that the equipment is followed and by the guidelines, but also more importantly, when people come back to us and say, or you go to a manufacturer and say, we've got a problem with your piece of equipment and it's under guarantee, the first thing they're going to say to you is, show me your inspection and maintenance regime for the last few years and does it comply? And it's a bit like you go back to the car scenario, and you've got a car and it needs a part, but actually your neighbor, your friend, somebody you know down the pub will fit the part for you. And then you have a major fault and it goes back to the garage where you bought it from, and the Ford, the Volkswagen or whatever say, well, it's not under warranty. And you say, well, it is. Well, hang on, you've had a part fitted here that's not a standard part. So that's where you've got to look and make sure that you constantly are following the inspection maintenance regime that I'm going to go through here and tell you what you actually should do. I don't read the screen, as you say, as you can see verbatim, because I just go off cuff. But on there, you want to avoid litigation. You want to get the best value from your costly investment. You want to make sure that you're within the guarantees. A lot of the equipment, when you're looking at it and when you're purchasing it, you're saying, oh, they've got a 15-year guarantee, they've got a 20-year guarantee, they've got a 25-year guarantee. That's great, and that's something you should be looking at. But if you don't follow the regime, then there's no point looking at the length of the guarantee, because it'll be useless when you come to make a claim on that. So these are the reasons why you should be doing it. So what should you be doing? You should be carrying out routine inspections. So there's 3 types of inspections. Normally at this point, when I'm doing this presentation face to face, I'll say to people, how many people are doing annual inspections? And everybody's hand goes up. And then I say, how many people are doing routine inspections? And you lose a few people in the room, but vast majority are still there. And there is one in between, and normally I'll lose about 80-90% of the people when I ask that next question. But the routine inspection is carried out by a competent person. Now, that competent person is somebody who has been had some element of training, as understanding of the playground equipment, and knows briefly what they're looking at. Now, that can be as simple as turning up to the play park and checking that there is no glass under the swings, that the swings, both the chains are fastened together, and that there's not one loose and it's hanging off. And it's basically going around with a lot of common sense on the playground, and that should be done on a daily stroke weekly basis. Now, that's not fixed because there is a bit of leeway, because within the standards they also are aware that if you're at the top of Derbyshire in the Peak District and you've got a playground and it's mid-January and the snow's coming in horizontal, that there's not going to be much use on the playground, and therefore weekly checks are fine. Come the summer and the roads clogged up and everyone's parked absolutely everywhere and there's kids everywhere, they're expecting more checks because there's more use in it. So there is a little bit of leeway in relation to it when I say daily, weekly. So you will have some people will have larger parks and know that they will get used an awful lot, and therefore they may have more checks than some of the quieter ones where maybe you only have a spring animal and a swing. So there is a bit of flexibility, but it should be carried out. And as we heard earlier on from Castle Donington, that they're carrying out their inspections as they go around, because they've got bins on sites. They've also got a fairly big park in the middle, it's Spittal Park, where there's a lot of use for football pitches and rugby pitches. And they've got Mugger, and they've got a skate park and dog walkers and everything. So there is a bit more of a reliance on that one being inspected than some of the others. And that'll be the same as you go across the areas. So a routine inspection, that, people can go through that. The training, there is training available from the companies that are mentioned. You can put your caretaker, your groundsman, your counsellor, whoever it may be, through a fairly basic training and look at that for the first level of reports. That also should be logged. Now, I know that in some areas they are logging it, and you can get some fairly basic software. So it can be a tick box and all your equipment's already logged in there. Sometimes it's a paper system and you've got a list of the swing, the roundabout, the seesaw, whatever that's on site there. And I do show an example at the end of this. And I'm sure John will fire these out if people want to have the presentation or any of the links that I talk about. But it should be logged, because at the end of the day, if somebody puts in a claim and says, oh, little Johnny fell off and cut their leg, broke their arm or whatever, and there was something that was on the playground, and we think, well, hang on, I removed that glass, I removed that boulder, I removed the burning bin that was underneath, then all that is being logged. There's a photograph and whatever taken at that point in time. So make sure that there is evidence of the routine inspections. The next inspection, when I did this talk actually in Oxfordshire, 2 days before, this actually happened. So if you can see that, nails were driven into slides, swings, decks on the unit. Now you'd think which person or who would do that sort of thing. Now this is the sort of thing that if you don't have your daily or routine inspections, who's picking that up? And what I'd say to you is, if that happened in your park today, who's picking that up today? Who's picking that up tomorrow? Because as you can see, I mean, that was last year. Somebody comes down that slide, there is an accident happening. And that's what I said before. Very few things shock me, and when you look at that, that's one of the things that you think, well, how are you going to cope? How is as a parish council, are you going to, is that going to get reported, and how is it going to get addressed? And that's picked up, and that's what I say about your routine inspections. Somebody rang that in from the school PTA to say, whoa, what are you going to do about this? Obviously, the park was closed immediately, and they had to then start an address. And most of them are easy to address. The one on the slide becomes very difficult because you've got a stainless steel slide that's got a puncture within it, and it's not just a case of knocking the nail out. So then you look at the operational inspections. And these are the ones that a lot of parish and town councils don't carry out. And these do, there's a lot more about these. It's not just about physically looking at items. There is some, it's greasing up items, it's inspecting bearings, it's making sure that aerial runways are working, that they're at a certain height, and there's a lot more knowledge of the standards required. And again, if you're looking to go on training courses for these, the bodies that I mentioned before, under the umbrella of the RPII, will do training courses. And it is a 2-3 day training course with an exam at the end of it. And that certificate should be renewed every 3 years. And you should have somebody that is carrying out those quarterly inspections on your playgrounds. So you should have 3 quarterly inspections a year. I've not slipped up in saying that because the 4th one is replaced by your annual inspection. You may find in certain areas that there is small companies, generally engineering companies locally, that'll carry those out. Or you may find, depending on which local authority that you're based in, that you've got district or borough councils who will carry these out on your behalf because they've got trained staff accordingly. So there is several areas that you can look at that will have those inspections, and they will carry those inspections out. Because I appreciate, obviously, a lot of parish councils, and as John's touched on early on, will only have one playground. And so therefore putting somebody through a 2-3 day course with an inspection at the end can be costly. But it may be that you get together as part of an ALC or an SLCC and get a combination, so you've got somebody that's in the area that carries that out. But these people, as I say, are looking at more of the nitty-gritty. The annual inspector will not touch your equipment, will not start and grease stuff up and tighten bolts and do whatever. He will tell you what's wrong, or she will tell you what's wrong. These people are actually getting down to that nitty-gritty, and this is very important. And I'll highlight something that is very common when people go along to look at playground equipment. Sometimes it's what you can't see. This was a parish council where I knew the parish clerk from a previous clerk role, and she'd just gone into a new parish council and said, Doug, there's no records of any inspections being carried out here. And this includes the annual ones. He says, well, I've done the annual ones, but I'm worried that, in the meantime, that there's stuff that's not being picked up. Would you mind having a quick look? And because I'd done a bit of work, it's not within my remit, but there's some of the stuff that you can do. We went along and got there actually just in the nick of time. And as you can see within a swing is a fairly straightforward process. You have a block on top, and if you look at the brass bushes that are in there in that top right-hand side, and the green one in the middle, that goes in the middle, and then the shackle and chain are suspended from that. Now, they do need replacing, because if they don't get replacing, and the bush, as you can see in the bottom right-hand side, is actually worn all the way through, it'll then start wearing on the block. Starts wearing on the block can then split. That's when you have an accident. Apart from that, it's now a cost. The one with the green, it's now cheaper to replace the swing. And so it's simple stuff like that that you need to be able to be aware of and know how to recognize that before it gets to that position. And I say this about making it simple. I'm all for making it simple and not complicating it. And there is lots of complicated swings out there now. This is a sort of task that most of us can perform, replace, and maintain. When I look at some of the other swings that are out there, I wouldn't even touch them. I'm not a big fan of flat pack stuff. I'll have a go, but I'm not sure I'm an expert in that side of things. So I'll keep it as simple as possible if you can. So that's important when you're looking at your purchasing stuff. And I keep saying is, can you afford to maintain it? If you haven't got the budget, if you haven't got the knowledge, if you haven't got the facility to carry out the inspections, should you be looking at certain items of playground equipment? I would love a Ferrari. I can't afford to maintain a Ferrari, so I don't have a Ferrari. So you think about it from that point of view. These are the other types of swings. I'll not spend much time, but the one on the left-hand side is the one similar to what I've just shown on the other one. Really simple, bush in, bush out. If you look at the other swing situations, if you're faced as a parish council to say, I need a part, which part are you ordering? You've got to dismantle it to work out the part accordingly. And also, we've done a cost exercise. If you look at the traditional side on the left-hand side and you want your shackles, your bushes, your chains, and a swing seat, and then you compare that to your shackles, chains, all the rest of it on the right-hand side, the left-hand side will work out round about £150. The right-hand side will work out about £300. So think about that when you're purchasing your swings. They might come in cheap to start with, and then actually it might cost you more to maintain them by the time you've replaced the odd seat, the odd chain, the odd bush, whatever it may be. So think about that from that point of view and looking at making it easy for you to maintain it. Annual inspections. I'm assuming and hoping that everybody's got annual inspections in place. And these are the ones that are carried out by a qualified RPII inspector. And you'll get a report that lists stuff, and generally it'll be high risk, medium risk, and low risk. So the high risk is something you should be doing something about straight away. Medium risk is have a look at it, monitor it. There is something going on there. There might be a life expectancy put on there that you should be keeping an eye on because it might be before the next annual inspection. And then there'll be a low risk. It's something you don't need to do anything about. It's just a risk. You will not get a report that comes out and that'll say there is no risk on a playground. Immediately you put a set of swings into a playground, you'll get a medium risk. Swings are the most popular item on playgrounds. Swings create the most accidents on playgrounds because of the most popular and the moving. So swings will come in as a medium risk generally, and they might be absolutely fine, nothing wrong with them in the first place. So that's what you've got to do when you get your annual inspections, but you don't just rely on it. And as I go back to the situation before, if your car has an MOT, and we all breathe a sigh of relief and say, oh, it's got through the MOT, doesn't mean that you don't do anything for the next 12 months before the next MOT. You go back, you look at your routine, you look at your quarterly inspections within that. I've mentioned within that they will, on the annual inspections, they will look at your equipment up to the current standards, because they are looking at it and saying this piece of play equipment should conform to EN 1176. Now, there is updates every now and again on certain pieces of equipment, and that's what they're going to inspect it to. However, as I've mentioned earlier on, some of you will have playground equipment that goes back many years, and was manufactured, installed before the current standards. A lot of you will have picked that up with swings, because swings have changed drastically, and you may have had 3 swings in a bay, and now they're only allowed 2 swings a bay, and they're tighter in terms of the distance between the arm and the chain, etc. Doesn't mean you have to get rid of them. But this is a great example, and I know it's 14-year-old, but the European standards came in 1999, replacing the previous British standards. And an inspection was carried out at a play area in Durham, and the inspection highlighted that there were several things that they were wrong with it, with the current standard, with this play equipment. And I'm sure some of you are looking at this saying, oh yeah, I've got this swing, I've got this roundabout or whatever. And the list what was wrong there. Now there's several things you can do on this, but what I wouldn't do is take it to literally, and which is what Durham did. And Durham said, well, this doesn't conform, so we better go down the line of providing something that does conform, and they ended up with that. So they removed everything bar the Springer, because it didn't conform. And as I've said, probably quite a few of you have got playground equipment that are suddenly gone from that picture. As you can imagine now, the kids have not really got a great deal to play at. And I know at that point in time, they were starting to have antisocial behavior, because the kids were playing in the bushes and doing everything else, as kids will be kids. There was plenty of retrospective fits that could have been carried out. There was also a lot of stuff that was actually just advisory to say, look, this equipment was manufactured before the standards and it doesn't conform now, but there's actually nothing else you can do or need to do. You could have taken a swing down in the middle and left with 2 rather than 3. You could have put a skirt on the seesaw. The slide was fine, even though the tread gaps were different. The inspector's going to raise it. And it's a bit like when you go for your tires and they say, by the way, your tires are 2.6 and you've got to keep an eye on it. They're not saying get rid of it, get rid of that tire, or else you end up in that position that the Durham were in. Standards are not.
Sorry, can I just interject slightly there?
Yeah, sure.
That park in Durham's, it's about half a mile from where I'm sitting.
Oh, right, from where you're at. It's
changed.
Yeah, it'll changed a bit.
Yeah, I'm just happy to report there's lots of good quality new play equipment there now.
And again, that was John mentioned before about unitary authorities. Things have changed a little bit since then as well. So, and that's good to hear. And you're not obviously not far from where I grew up as well, because I'm familiar with it as well. But so the standards aren't retrospective. Now, here's an example of an inspector who's picked up recently, and lots of you may come across this, where you get there's been a change in the standards, and the inspector here has picked it up and said, I've got to inspect to the standards. However, the unit was installed prior to the current publication. There's no requirement to make the retrospective change. So he's flagging it up. He's saying you don't need to do anything. And I highlight this one because it's the feet and the handholds on spring animals have changed. And so the diameter is a bit different. It's nothing you need to do about it. But I do know that in parish council meetings, you see that and people go, oh, it doesn't conform. We need to change it. No, you don't. It's been flagged up. It's not a big risk within that. And as you can see, the inspector here has scored it as a very low. What I don't like, and I'm sure this is the same for a lot of councils up and down the country, is I don't like independent comments coming from inspectors. What you're paying for is the inspectors to inspect to a standard and let you know what needs to be done. When you get independent comments, it doesn't help you. So when people say, we prefer, or it shouldn't be like this, in my opinion, it doesn't wash. You want to know, does it conform to EN 1176 for playground equipment, EN 1177 for surfacing, EN 16 whatever for fitness equipment, etc. That's what you need to know. So you do get independent comments, and ROSPA do pick this up and say there's a lot about bins. And one council on the right, that picture on the right-hand side at the top, you can see how far that bin is and how much surfacing is around that bin, because they tend to go down that line and wanted to make sure that the bin is 2 meters away from benches and gates, etc. That costs about an extra £5,000 in surfacing just to make sure that it's away when it's not needed. And the problem is, if you do that, are the kids going to use the bin as they go in and out of the park? So we're looking for it being up to the standards, no more, no less. When we talk about inspection maintenance, a lot of questions come up about surfacing, different types of surfacing. This is just there to let you be aware of the different types of surfacing. Safer mat has come in the last 10, 15 years a lot, where the grass grows through it. Most cost effective, you get more playground equipment for your buck. Easy to repair, bit more aesthetically pleasing when the grass is covering it. Wet pour is shredded lorry tires, can have various colors in it, but people will have a lot of shrinkage because temperatures have changed over the last few years, and around the edges you'll get maybe trip hazards as it comes away from the edge. So that's been replaced in a lot of areas by the bottom left-hand side, fiber fall. People call it rubber crumb, bonded rubber crumb, tiger mulch, whatever you want to call it. And that basically gets tucked into the surface, so you don't have a pin curb around it, and therefore you don't have the trip hazard that if you get shrinkage within the wet pour surfacing. So rubber crumb again, just a bigger crumb as opposed to the wet pour. Synthetic carpet on the bottom right-hand side there. So I describe that as a bit like the old football five-a-side hockey pitches that we'd have played on in days gone by, as opposed to the 4, 5, 6G that they use today. So that that is a suitable surface. Again, it all depends on budget and one thing or another, but it's just to give you an idea within that, because I know I do get a lot of questions about surfacing and when it's been inspected. Highlighting a bit of different surfacing here. Water is not a surface. That's actually a bark pit, but the council where it was at had bark put down, but it traditionally floods, and I don't understand why the supplier didn't have that conversation, because they banked up all the spoil on the side, and the kids love the water, the parents not so much these days, because you can imagine going down that slide's great fun until you go home to your parents. Maintaining it, bottom right hand side, bark, cost effective, but if you don't maintain it and you've got weeds everywhere, you're going to have issues. And on fast moving equipment, the grass mat, safer mat surfacing, if it's not been replenished and the grass has not grown through, the inspector will pick it up and suggest that you actually cover it, put new grass down, seed it. But that means then taking the piece of equipment out of action. So that's just a bit of a downside from that side of it. I'm also coming across a lot of differences on surfacing, because within the standards, grass has a fall height attributed to it. Up to 1.5, you can put playground equipment onto well-maintained grass. The definition of well-maintained grass only comes into play if there's an accident, because that's when you'll start getting small claims court and looking at is the grass well maintained? Has it got any foreign bodies in it, etc.? So it's all right to start with. And if you look at that picture of the basket swing in the middle at the top, at the point of handing that over from the manufacturers to the parish council, that conformed because they've got the main wear area covered with fiberfall. The grass, as you can see, was well maintained. And that picture was taken about 6 weeks later. Suddenly, you've got a hard area because where kids, parents, whoever have been pushing the users on the swing, the grass has worn out. If a child was then to fall into that zone, which is well within the falling space, and bang their head on a stone, or the ground's hard because it's the summer, or frost because it's the winter, then a claim could ensue from that. So at the point in time that went in, it conformed, but I think it was it was short sense and a bit of a fast move by the installers putting that down and saying, yeah, we've had an inspection, there you go, it all conforms. The parish council are then having to face, well, hang on, do we extend the surfacing here? Because at the next inspection, that's going to fail. And it's the same with the other items that I've flagged up on there rather than going individually through them. Ground conditions. Yeah, grass, well-maintained grass up to 1.5 meters is fine. So as you can see, a lot of people, put low-level stuff on the ground. That doesn't conform very quickly. If the footings are exposed, you can see the concrete in 3 of them. The inspector will also, and this, the reason I put the bench in there is to say to you, the inspector will look at the whole area. He'll look at your footpaths up to it, the bins, the seats, and in terms of what the risk is, and say, well, at that area, that seat should have a hard stand appropriate to it, because if somebody's getting up from that seat, there is a trip hazard straight onto the rubber surfacing. It wouldn't cost much. What you can't see from there is the council involved had spent about £150,000 on the playground to the right-hand side of it. And it wouldn't have been much for somebody just to have run a bit of concrete round that and leveled it all up and provided a plinth for it. I've spoke briefly about wet pour and the gaps, and that shows you the contraction and expansion. A lot of the inspectors these days will say, let the grass creep and grow because it'll fill in the gap on the side. What it won't do is if you've got different colours, and colours do look nice, but that's what happens over the time. You can see one in the middle there is a new area. The one on the top left is what happens because you've got contracting and expansion between different colours, and you've put a joint in. So you've got to be looking at, can you maintain it? Will you pick that up? That is now a trip hazard in that park. What do? Do you replace it? Do you replace the whole lot? Do you overlay the whole lot? This is what you've got to look at when you're picking that up and deciding at the initial point of your playgrounds, have you got the budget? Because normally you can get capital expenditure, but revenue is very difficult to go out and get a grant accordingly. With the safer mat, I've highlighted something there on the bottom 2 slides. Is if it does wear out, you can overlay it with rubber. So you don't need to pull the safer mat up, because again, nobody wants to put rubber into landfill. Talk about being environmentally friendly. You can actually go over the top of it with the rubber, and that's an area that you can see a before and after picture. And that because that's something that's going to get flagged on an inspection. The other thing I'd say is, and the top right-hand side is a builder's development. The maintenance of the park, yes, there's not the best grass in the world left by the developer, but whoever's cutting the grass just went straight over it and shredded the tiles within that, without any thought of lifting the blades up a little bit more, because the tiles were slightly proud. So that is something that would have to then get repaired. And that's what I was saying before in terms of expenditure. It's one of the easiest, the most cost effective to replace. Most of us could lay a tile down and put cable ties between it, but most of us couldn't. Mix the rubber and layer that accordingly. So again, just stuff that you're thinking about when you're looking at your purchase and maintaining it going forward. I've mentioned that seats and bins, certainly gates and fencing will be picked up by the local authority, by the inspector. The one on the bottom left there, nice design by the architects to put in the maintenance gate in front of a bollard. So you can open the maintenance gate, you can't get anything in because there's a bollard there, and the bollard's not a drop bollard. So whoever's going to use the maintenance gate is going to have to cut the bollard out. So it's just simple little things like that. You're looking at fencing, look at that top left-hand side with the sharpness. That should never have been left like that by the installer. It should have been cut off, filed, and repainted. But all these type of things that the inspector will pick up at, the speed of the gate closing, making sure that that's right. The one in the middle there at the top, the gate doesn't close. It's a self-closing gate. And they've put a dog or an animal grid in to stop the animals coming in, but they've put in a plinth down the side of it. So if the dog wanted to walk in, it would just walk down the side of it. So it's totally useless. They've spent a lot of money there when they could have done with just putting a gate in that worked, and rather than the animal grid as well. Findings on your report, and this one's got a traffic light system, so it says what the risk is accordingly. This goes back down to gates. They've set the gate there to fit the height of the fence, but in the meantime, they left a huge bit of space underneath, so a small dog can get underneath that. So it then doesn't conform because the gate's too high. Little bit about equipment now in terms of the type of equipment and what will get picked up. A lot of people like timber equipment and lots of landscape features going into parks over the last few years. It's good. It looks nice. It's a bit like when you put your timber fence in. It smells nice, looks nice around your garden. And then I always think, oh, I've got to go and paint that every 3 years. Inspectors are going to pick it up because there will be issues with timber and rotting down, especially on the landscape side of things. And when I look at some of these things, they look really nice. They blend in lovely. But there's maintenance issues that you're going to pick up. And with timber, a lot of the stuff that's in the ground is what you're struggling to maintain, because that's where it's going to start rotting. That's where you're going to start getting the wear. Boulders. A lot of landscape architects now have been putting in boulders for the last few years. And we have a constant battle. We now don't put boulders in, because we will put a timber log in of some description, because the inspectors are saying to us, the use of boulders in play area presents a risk of users falling onto a hard object. Well, that's no surprise, because the boulder is hard. And this one says, it goes further to say that they've got sharp edges. I would suggest you remove all the sharp edges. The glacier boulder has been around for quite a few years. It's a little bit of a challenge to start filing that down. And then when you get the smooth ones and they say rough it up, you wonder how you're going to rough it up, because you've got to clean the moss off it, and then you've got to try and put lines in it. It's not a manufactured product. You're not going to get indemnity on it, whereas you can a little bit more when you've got manufactured playground equipment. So boulders, and as a sideline, this cost the parish council about £3,000 to remove the boulders from the playground, because they had to access a farmer's field to get a lifting machine in to remove the boulders that had been put in from a landscape design. I'm not a big fan at all. When it comes to logs, they go in. if you've got bark on them, that's going to degenerate over the next few years. The inspector is going to tell you that they need shaving down, filed, and all the rest of it. That's a process that you've got to do. So you, as an inspector, you're looking at, are they sharp? Have you got splinters? You're creating extra work for yourselves by putting in products that are going to rot in a very short period of time, especially when you've looked at playground equipment that's going to last for 15, 20 years, when you know some of the natural products are not going to do it within that time. So think before you put them in, are you going to be able to maintain them? Some of the inspectors actually do have a wood gun, and they can actually put a very fine needle into the wood, give you a life expectancy of the wood, and also tell you what's gone on with it and see what state it's at. Because if you look at from a routine inspection, can you tell what's going on? You might kick a little bit of bark away, as you can see on that photo, and see that, oh, hang on, it is rotting already. But you to have it done properly, some of the inspections will actually, inspectors will be able to do that for you. And again, refer to the RPII. There's not that many that does. A little bit of free advertising for the inspector there that's got it in the picture. People have moved over to Rabinia because they say it doesn't split. I can tell you it does split, and there's some photos. And the inspector's failing that, and where this is put in, the company are telling that it doesn't fail, and it needs to split a bit more before it does. Basically, if you can get a fingernail in within that, and child's fingers obviously thinner, then it's failing, and that's a problem. And those pieces of wood needs replacing. Recycled materials, you know, there's structurally, the table on the bottom right hand side, yes, it's warped. Is it a problem? No, it's not. Interesting enough, those swings, they look all right. There's a reasonable gap between them, but when they're in use, those two swings bang together. So it's not the type of thing you'd automatically pick up as an inspector, because you'd think, all right, decent gap. But it's actually the residents that are saying, well, we need something done with these swings, because every time the kids are on them, we're just getting a knocking all the time. I mentioned material specifications. That's just as a for you to look at when you're purchasing your equipment, because you're going to maintain it. You're going to look after it. You're going to spend your money on it later on. If it's thin, it's not going to last as long. So just be careful when you're doing that, because that's stuff that you're going to pick up later on. Failing to inspect. I mentioned at the beginning there about going down the line of, you know, if you don't do it, then you're going to be failing, and if there's an accident, you could be held liable for it. There's a London borough there that had timber equipment, a timber swing hanging off, wasn't maintained, wasn't inspected. Unfortunately, it collapsed, and unfortunately, the girl died. And the council got sued from that. Say, I'm not here to frighten you, but it's just to say you've got to put your processes in place. I mentioned, can you maintain what you're putting in? You look at aerial runways, they'll need retensioning, flush roundabouts. You've got to be able to get access to them in the ground and clean them out. Whereas obviously if it's a raised roundabout, you can sweep underneath it with a long-handled broom. But there's a great appeal that you can put prams and wheelchairs on them. But think about what you can maintain. Do you want all the excitement? And yes, we do. Can you afford to maintain it? No. And if it ends up being derelict and left because of the lack of maintenance, then it becomes a bit of a white elephant. I hinted before at the inspection and maintenance schedules. When you buy a piece of equipment, you should get this from your manufacturer. So you should have a little list that says, this is what you need to do, whether it be on swings, roundabouts, seesaws or whatever, and then a tick box. And this is something I can send out. If you request it through John, I can send this out and you can have a bit of a tick box, or you can send me an email and I can send it. Obviously, you'll have to tweak it accordingly to your playgrounds, but you should have this for the people that are carrying out the routine inspections, because then you can just go straight through and go, right, this is the seesaw, this is what we're looking for, this is the swing, this is the roundabout, etc. Just a straight tick box, and that's what you'd get if you had an electronic system. But I appreciate there's a cost involved in relation to that. I've talked about the Register of Playground Inspectors, who they are. Hopefully you've taken that on board. A couple of documents that are worth looking at, and these are free to download. So if you want to make a note of them, and you can Google them, and you can download them, and it goes into consultation, it goes into design, and it goes into inspecting and maintaining your playgrounds. They are good documents to have to hand. Signage, they will look at signs in terms of making sure. I don't like it when it says there's too much to take. You've got to, don't do this, don't do that, because the kids are there to enjoy themselves. That's a fairly standard one on the top right hand side. If you're putting a no dog sign, bottom right hand side, make sure it's above the level of where your grass cutter is going to go, because the inspector was impressed to had a no dog sign. It's not impressed now, it's a sharp no dog sign, and therefore that needs to be replaced. Signage, what it should entail, I've just briefly touched within that. I'm conscious that my time's about up in terms of the presentation.